actually in Uruguay.
Okay.
I'm going to show you out my window. So can you see the sea down there? We're looking down towards the Rio Plata, the little bit of the Atlantic that runs between Argentina and Uruguay. Uruguay is one of about 3 remaining countries in the world that has had no coronavirus diagnosis yet, so it's maybe not the worst place to be. I am due to go back to Ireland this weekend, so flights are looking troublesome and all of that. But it's for the second year my wife and I have spent most of the Irish winter in the summer down here in Latin America. And Montevideo is a really lovely, kind of sleepy, kind of quiet city, but much to recommend it. I live in a building that used to be a police station in the 1800s. It's an old building. It's an old police barracks. So my usual office used to be a holding cell. It used to be a cell for Fenian prisoners in the 1800s. The kind of tragic thing is there isn't even a single ghost. When we bought the place, we thought surely there would be many ghosts in a building like this, but there doesn't appear to be. But no, I do believe in that old saying about, a tidy desk means an untidy mind, and the more chaotic your brain is, the more likely you're going to go for a very kind of a crisp, clean office surface. Like my wife's office is chaos, looks absolutely hideous, just mountains of sort of books and papers overflowing here, there, and everywhere. And I couldn't work in that. I'm so crazed and mad most of the time trying to make the story come out right on the page. I need to have very sort of unexciting surroundings, very, very flat. I think often any writer or artist or creative person, you make decisions in your life that seem to be pragmatic, kind of life decisions that don't seem to be connected to the work at all, but they end up really influencing the work. And of course, the primary sort of decision you make is, where am I going to live? Where am I going to base myself? Because your location starts to feed into the work in a very very real and very kind of profound way the longer you're in a place. So yeah, I grew up in cities and lived in cities always until 12 years ago now. We bought a place in rural Ireland, and I managed to kind of inadvertently follow, I guess, I think it's the best piece of writing advice I've ever heard. Came from the great American essayist Annie Dillard, and she said, "Keep your overheads low." that's all you need to know for a writing life, And I mean, it's very different. It used to be the case that the emerging writer or novelist or poet would go to the city. You'd go to New York, or you'd go to London, or you'd go to Paris, and good luck with that now if you don't have private means, because it's very interesting that in the last kind of 10 and 12 years, with the sort of processes of gentrification in all our cities, you have a kind of a historically unprecedented situation where writers and artists and musicians aren't moving to the cities anymore. They're moving to the quieter places and the cheaper places, because that's how they can get by. Living in an old police station in a swamp in County Sligo in the northwest of Ireland means that I don't have to teach, for example. The mortgage is small, and it means I can just concentrate on my writing. I don't have to have a second job. But the place starts to feed into your work the longer you stay in it. I've found what I'm up to at the desk here. I'm finishing off a new book of short stories that's going to come out at the start of 2021 in the US, called That Old Country Music. And there are 11 stories in it. And most are now around the northwest of Ireland, where I'm based. Most have a kind of a rural backdrop or setting. And it's, the work follows you around, really. And it's a very important decision for any emerging writer to make. Where am I going to live? Where am I going to base myself? for a number of years, lots of Irish writers and artists have been moving to Berlin, because Berlin has been the last kind of affordable metropolis in Europe, but it's now kind of pricing itself out of the reach of many again. But it's something to think very, very seriously about. I grew up in a small city in the west of Ireland called Limerick. And like when I was a teenager and in my early 20s there, myself and my friends, the conversation will be how do we get out? How do we get out of the place? How do we get to a bigger city? And now when I go back and talk to nephews and talk to young people in Limerick now, they're very kind of interested in the idea of just staying put because the rents are more affordable. They don't have to work 10 horrible jobs just to make the nut on the rent every month, and they can pursue their creative lives in a more relaxed way. So it's a really interesting question for writers and artists and musicians everywhere in the planet now, is where am I going to base myself in the way that's best suited to allowing me to proceed with my artistic practice. I mean, in terms of books, I kind of a transformative reading experience I remember was maybe being about 10 years old and being off school with a cold or with flu or something, and one of my older sisters was doing Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte for the Irish equivalent of high school, and picking up the book and reading it, and really for the first time been kind of thrown up against the wall by a book, and just realizing how powerful the experience was, and realizing that a good novel is a mode of transport. It lifts you up from where you are, and it puts you in another world. So yeah, I remember kind of having the first sense of what literary power felt like reading Wuthering Heights as a 10-year-old. I do think in terms of cultural influences, the most important ones tend to go in when you're kind of teenager and kind of maybe in around early 20s. I think the influences that go in then, the stuff that you're into at that age, is the kind of stuff you always have as kind of a foundational kind of influence in your work. So when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I was very much obsessed with Twin Peaks and all things David Lynch. I was listening to records by the Pixies, by Nick Cave, the aforementioned. I would think for lots of writers of my generation, television and movie and music influences are just as important as literary influences, really. I think all of our storytelling from writers from my generation and younger generations are greatly influenced by television storytelling. We tend to frame our novels now in televisual scenes, and it's interesting. I guess, like so many writers, I also had great English teachers. I had a guy who taught me when I was maybe 16 until when I left school at 17 or 18, who was a big poetry nut and just kind of got us into like Jared Manley Hopkins and things like that. And I always remember reading Hopkins' poems like The Windhover, and just been fascinated by what the rhythm of the line could do to you emotionally. But yeah, so I'm a pretty classic kind of late 80s, early 90s coming of age person in terms of influences. We never get away from our kind of David Lynch fixations and Twin Peaks stuff and all of that, really.